Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into something you sent our way,
Oh, cool.
an article all about customizing a Trek top fuel.
Yeah.
Taking that cross-country speed demon
Yeah.
and giving it some serious trail chops. Sounds pretty cool.
Right. It does. It really does, yeah. It shows how people are pushing the boundaries. They really want the best of both worlds, it seems.
Right. So for those who maybe haven't ridden one, the Trek top fuel is known for efficiency, on those smoother trails.
Yeah.
But the 2025 model, this is interesting. It comes with 120 millimeters of rear travel and can handle forks from 120 to 140 millimeters.
Oh, wow.
That little detail got our listeners' gears turning.
So they went for it, huh?
They did. They transformed their top fuel into a trail bike
Nice.
with 140 millimeters of travel up front and 130 in the rear.
Wow. That's
Now, I know,
big change.
I know what you might be thinking. That's a big change. And you're not wrong. But here's the thing. They didn't swap out the entire fork in shock. They did some clever modifications, like changing the air shaft in the fork and removing a travel reducer in the rear shock.
Clever.
And guess what? It only cost them around 600 Australian dollars.
That's a pretty smart move, I'd say. I mean, buying a whole new fork and shock would have been so much more expensive. This approach really shows how modular these bikes are becoming. They give you more options to customize without spending, like, thousands of dollars.
Totally. But of course, with any modifications, you need to adjust that suspension setup.
For sure.
The article talks about tweaking the air pressure,
Yeah.
rebound damping, and those little bottomless tokens. Ever wonder what those things actually do?
Oh, yeah. Bottomless tokens, they let you really fine-tune the feel of the suspension at the end of its travel, right? Make it more progressive so it doesn't, like, bottom out harshly when you hit something big.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happens to the bike's geometry, when you do this, when you increase the travel like this. The article mentions that the head angle becomes a bit slacker.
Yeah.
What does that even mean for the ride?
So a slacker head angle basically means the front wheel sits further out in front, which generally speaking makes the bike feel more stable, especially on descents. Kind of like pointing your skis downhill, Gives you more confidence when things get steep.
Okay, I'm picturing it. But doesn't that also mess with the bottom bracket height, where the pedals are?
You'd think so, right. But the article says the bottom bracket height stayed pretty much the same.
Oh!
And that's key because it means the bike still pedals well uphill. You don't want to be dragging a boat anchor up every climb.
Now, this is what I really wanted to know. How did all this affect the actual riding experience?
Yeah.
The article describes the modified top fuel as more forgiving and floaty.
I think that floaty feeling is because the suspension is able to absorb more of the trail's bumps and stuff. It's like having a magic carpet smoothing out the rough stuff,
And it doesn't turn into a sluggish beast on the climbs.
Apparently not. The article really emphasizes how the bike keeps that peppy, efficient pedaling that top fuels are known for. They even compare it to some other popular trail bikes.
Like what?
Like the Trek Fuel EX, Giant Transx,
Oh, right.
Canyon Spectral, and Specialized Stump Jumper, that kind of thing. The usual suspects.
Oh, that's a good point. So it's not just about adding travel. It's about finding that sweet spot where you have the capability for rough terrain,
Yeah.
but you don't sacrifice the climbing prowess. That's got to be tough to do, right?
It is. And this is where the listeners' modifications get really interesting. They didn't just focus on suspension. They also made some changes to the brakes, you see. They weren't happy with the performance of the stock SRAM-level brakes.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Sometimes those stock brakes just don't cut it, especially when you're, pushing the bike harder on descents.
Yeah.
So what did they do?
Well, they upgraded to thicker SRAM HS2 rotors, and they swapped the pads for metallic ones. Think of it this way. The thicker rotors act kind of like bigger heat sinks, preventing brake fade on those long descents. And metallic pads generally have more bite and stopping power compared to resin pads, which usually come stock.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You want those brakes to be reliable and powerful when you're flying downhill. Did they say how those upgrades felt?
Yeah, they said the lever felt firmer with less dead stroke, So you get more braking power with less effort. That's huge for confidence when you're navigating tricky terrain.
Now let's talk about rubber meeting the trail tires and wheels.
Oh, right. Our riders swapped out the stock Bontrager tires for some chunkier Bontrager Brevard XT tires.
Okay.
Those are designed for more aggressive trail riding, giving better grip and stability on loose surfaces and technical sections. Of course, there's always a trade-off. Those beefier tires are going to add a bit of weight.
Yeah, that's always the dilemma. More grip usually means more rolling resistance and a slightly heavier feel. But wait, they also got new wheels, right?
They did. They went with some lighter race-face turbine wheels, which, is a smart move. Lighter wheels can offset the weight penalty of those tires, and they also improve acceleration and responsiveness.
So they're adding weight with the tires and then taking it away with the wheels.
Yep.
It's like a balancing act.
Exactly. And they didn't stop there. They also made some changes to the cockpit, like the handlebar and grips and the drivetrain. They put on a new race-face turbine handlebar and Chester grips for comfort and control.
And I bet those grips help with those vibrations, especially on those rough trails.
Yeah.
What about the drivetrain? Any changes there?
They swapped out that 30-tooth chainring for a 32-tooth one. This wasn't about gearing, though. It was about reducing drivetrain feedback. Makes the pedaling feel smoother, especially when pushing hard through rocky sections.
So it's about fine-tuning how the power gets to the ground. I can see how that would make a difference on technical climbs.
And you know what? They even added those little STFU chain damping modules just to keep things quiet. Prevents chain slap and noise.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it's a way to minimize those little annoyances, that can distract you on the trail.
Okay, so let's recap here. We've got a Trek Top Fuel that's been transformed into a more capable trail bike. It's got more travel, upgraded brakes, chunkier tires, lighter wheels, and some clever tweaks to the cockpit and drivetrain. Sounds like a pretty sweet setup.
It does. But, I think what's most impressive is that they've kept the essence of the Top Fuel. It's still got that lively feel, that climbing prowess, and that overall versatility.
This whole project makes me think it's like a testament to the ingenuity of riders who aren't afraid to tinker and push the boundaries.
For sure. It reminds us that we're not limited by those labels or categories that bikes are assigned. We can adapt and modify them to suit our riding styles and the trails we want to explore.
It's not even just about the technical aspects. It's about the creative process, right?
Yeah.
The experimentation, the joy of making a bike truly your own.
Absolutely. However, let's not get carried away with all this excitement. We do need to acknowledge that there might be some limitations to this approach.
Oh, right. You're talking about those trade-offs we were discussing earlier.
Exactly. While this modified Top Fuel seems to handle technical trails well, there might be scenarios where a purpose-built trail bike would simply be a better tool for the job.
You mean for really extreme terrain or aggressive riding?
Precisely. Purpose-built trail bikes are designed from the ground up with specific geometry, suspension kinematics, and component choices that are, optimized for those demanding conditions. While you can certainly push a modified bike beyond its intended use, there might be limits to how far you can go before you start compromising performance or durability.
That's a good point. There's always a balance to consider.
And let's not forget about the practical stuff, too. Modifying a bike can void warranties or impact resale value. It's important to, do your research and understand the implications before making big changes.
Right. You don't want to end up with a bike that's no longer covered by the manufacturer's warranty or becomes difficult to sell later on.
But even with all those considerations, I think the spirit of this project is really inspiring. It challenges us to think outside the box, to see the potential in our bikes, to view them as evolving canvases for our riding passions.
It's like they've unlocked a hidden potential within the Top Fuel, showing us that we're not limited by the manufacturer's vision of what a bike should be.
Exactly. And maybe that's the most important takeaway. It's not just about a specific bike or a set of modifications. It's about empowering riders to explore, to experiment, and to create something that truly reflects their individual riding style and aspirations.
That's a great point. It's about that personal connection we have with our bikes and the joy of pushing the limits of what's possible. So what does all of this mean for our listeners? Where do we go from here?
It's kind of crazy how this Top Fuel, it's like blurring the lines between a cross-country bike and a trail bike. At first glance, it seems similar to that Fuel EX, but there are some key differences.
Right. Those older Fuel EX models, they were known for being a bit more aggressive, weren't they?
Exactly. The older Fuel EX, it came with a much burlier Fox 36 fork. Heavier, but built for, bigger hits. And they had that unique Trek RE.active shock, known for efficiency, but maybe not as plush as some others out there.
So even though the travel numbers might seem similar on paper, The actual components and suspension design create a totally different feel out on the trail. What other differences stand out to you?
Well, the top fuel, even with all these mods, it's still lighter and more agile than that older Fuel EX. And something people forget is the seat tube angle. The top fuel has a steeper seat tube angle, which puts you in a better pedaling position when you're climbing.
Ah, that makes sense. So it's not just about travel, it's all these little details that add up to the whole riding experience. This top fuel might be more capable on descents, but it hasn't lost that climbing edge.
Exactly, and practically speaking, I like that the top fuel uses standard suspension components. You're not stuck with proprietary parts. So there are more options for future upgrades or tuning.
Yeah, I'm all about options. Speaking of, the article goes into specifics about the build, like swapping the stock carbon handlebar for an alloy one. Why do that?
Well, carbon fiber is great. It's light and stiff, but it can transmit a lot of vibrations from the trail. Some riders, they find that leads to hand fatigue, especially on long rides. An alloy bar actually dampens those vibrations, making the ride a bit more comfortable.
Interesting. So it's not always about going for the lightest or most high-tech stuff. It's about finding what works best for you.
For sure. And remember that drivetrain tweak we talked about, going from a 30-tooth to a 32-tooth chainring?
Yeah, you said it wasn't just about gearing.
Right. By going up in chainring size, they actually decrease something called an anti-squat effect.
Anti-squat.
Basically, anti-squat is how much the suspension bobs when you pedal. By decreasing it, the suspension becomes more active, which can smooth out the ride on rough terrain, especially when you're pedaling through rocky sections.
So it's a trade-off. Smoother ride, but maybe a bit less efficient pedaling.
It can be, but remember, they also added those STFU chain damping modules. Those little things help guide the chain and prevent it from bouncing around.
Yeah.
It minimizes noise and creates a more refined feel, kind of like silencing those little annoyances that can distract you out on the trail.
Okay, so let's recap. We've got a Trek Top Fuel that's been transformed into a more capable trail bike. It's got more travel, upgraded brakes, chunkier tires, lighter wheels, and some smart tweaks to the cockpit and drivetrain. Sounds pretty sweet.
It does. But what's really cool is they've kept the heart of the top fuel. It still has that lively feel, climbs well, and is super versatile.
This whole project is making me think, it's really a testament to those riders who love to tinker and push the boundaries.
Absolutely. It reminds us we're not limited by those labels, We can adapt and modify our bikes to suit us and the trails we ride.
It's not just about the technical stuff either. It's about being creative, experimenting, and the fun of making a bike truly your own.
100%. However, let's not get too carried away. We do need to remember there might be some limitations to this approach.
Oh, right. Like those trade-offs we were talking about.
Exactly. This top fuel seems to do well on technical trails, but there might be times when a purpose-built trail bike would just be better.
You mean like for really extreme terrain or super aggressive riding?
Right. Those bikes are designed specifically for those tough conditions with the right geometry, suspension, and components. While you can push a modified bike, there might be limits before you start losing performance or durability.
Good point. It's always about balance.
And let's not forget about the practical stuff, too. Like modifying a bike can sometimes void warranties or make it harder to resell. Do your research before making any big changes.
Right. Don't want to end up with a bike that's not covered anymore or that you can't sell later.
But even with all that, I think this project is super inspiring. It challenges us to think outside the box and see the potential in our bikes, to think of them as evolving canvases for our love of riding,
It's like they've found this hidden potential in the top fuel, showing us that we don't have to be limited by what the manufacturer thought the bike should be.
Exactly. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. It's not about one specific bike or some modifications. It's about empowering riders to explore, to experiment, and to create something that really reflects them and their riding style.
That's such a good point. It's about that connection we have with our bikes and the joy of pushing the limits. So what does this all mean for our listeners? What should they be thinking about? This has been so cool. I don't know about you, but I'm already thinking about my own bike.
Right. It really gets you thinking. You're probably thinking, okay, this is all well and good, but what about me? What about my bike and the trails I ride?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's cool to see someone else's project, but how do we actually use these ideas for ourselves?
Okay, so let's say you've been thinking about a new bike, but maybe it doesn't have enough travel for the trails you want to ride. Or maybe you love your current bike, but it's a little sluggish on the climbs.
Yeah, I've been there.
This deep dive shows us that we don't have to just settle.
Yeah, we can be proactive. Instead of just accepting a bike as it is, we can explore these modification options.
Exactly. Think of it like this. The listener took a cross-country bike and made it more trail-worthy. What if we flip that?
Ooh, I like that. Taking a trail bike and making it more efficient for cross-country riding.
Exactly. So you've got a bike that's already comfortable on descents, and you make it lighter, more responsive, a total rocket uphill.
So lighter wheels, faster rolling tires, maybe even changing up the suspension to make it a bit firmer. It's like you're creating a bike that can handle technical terrain, but still flies on smooth sections.
And that brings us to a question for you all today. Is there a limit to how much we can change a bike's intended purpose? Can we really blur the lines between categories, or are there just some boundaries we can't cross?
That's a good one. Something to think about. Maybe it'll spark an idea for your next bike project, or maybe it'll send you down a rabbit hole of bike research.
Whatever you do, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep experimenting, and most importantly, keep riding.
And hey, if you did any cool customizations to your bike, let us know. We'd love to hear about your creative builds and how you came up with them. Until next time, happy trails, everyone.